Well, this is a surprise, but I'm glad you're listening. I know what you're thinking. Didn't the First Principles podcast draw its curtains? Yes, we did. But then we decided to do a final super splice of every single episode we did. There were 41 founders. A bit too many for a single Supercut episode, don't you think? So here's the first 20. We went through all the episodes and picked a few minutes from each that we felt captured the essence of that specific founder and their approach to entrepreneurship, leadership, and well, life. You listen to Kabeer Biswas, co-founder and CEO of Dunzo, Baskar Subramamian, co-founder and CEO of Amagi, Nithin Kamath, co-founder and CEO of Zerodha, Naveen Tewari, founder and CEO at InMobi, Ananth Narayanan, founder and CEO of Mensa Brands, Harshil Mathur, co-founder and CEO of Razorpay, Vineeta Singh, co-founder and CEO of Sugar Cosmetics, Amrish Rau, CEO of Pine Labs, Amit Agarwal, co-founder and CEO of NoBroker, Tarun Mehta, co-founder and CEO of Ather Energy, Deep Kalra, founder and chairman of Make My Trip, Ruchi Kalra, co-founder and CEO of Oxyzo, Kamal Sagar, co-founder and CEO of Total Environment, Srikanth Iyer, co-founder and CEO of Homelane, Shan Kadavil, founder and CEO of Fresh to Home, Kunal Shah, founder and CEO of CRED, Srikanth Velamakanni, co-founder and CEO of Fractal, Ronnie Screwvala, co-founder and chairperson of Upgrade, Gaurav Munjal, co-founder and CEO of Unacademy, and Smita Deorah, co-founder and co-CEO of Lead. Even if you've listened to most of these episodes, I think you still might enjoy this intense supercut. Meanwhile, we're working hard at our next podcast, which I should be able to introduce to you very shortly. I'm excited. I'm also Rohan Dharmakumar, your host, and here's part 1 of our final supercut. Are you a big believer in feedback loops?
Of course.
I mean, are there feedback loops that you've explicitly constructed to inform you and give you feedback on when you might be wrong about something or right about something? I'm not talking about Dunzo, I'm talking about your feedback loops.
So I look at them as two forms, right? One is external and internal to the organization. On the external side, of course, I think I might be doing a lot more than on the internal, and I realize. Because I think I just care a little bit more on exactly what's happening on the user, partner, and merchant one. So even today, I think on a daily basis, I get at least about 50 contacts between a user, partner, and a merchant reaching out to me directly on WhatsApp call or email. And I most likely read all of it and get it resolved also via a small team that's just looking at those. It most likely keeps me much more connected to the business because, of course, you take out time to be able to call up customers, etc. But some things data's not going to show, right? Just hearing from users directly, and especially when things go wrong, they tend to teach you a lot of stuff. Internally and, of course, with people close, I think this is and so this is something that I tell people when we start working together at the top. I have just two levels of trust. I have 100 or 0, right? And
so there are binary outcomes.
Binary outcome on trust should exist, right? And I think I'm putting absolutely all the faith in the world for you to be able to do what you are doing, and you will never have to super guess me. That is a promise that I make while we are working together. Right? And in case there is something that I feel is off, etc., I'm not going to wait for necessarily what you call setting up conversations. We'll chat then and there itself at the end of that meeting or at the end of that day or something like that and have a quick conversation saying, maybe this could have gone differently. Right? And on the other end, I go ahead and open it up from that if you need time from me, we will find time today. right? To be able to go ahead and have a chat. Worst case, 36 hours, right? And I think there are 2 or 3 things that we keep very close to ourselves culturally. One is we are very honest, we're very humble, and we're constantly curious, right? Those are 3 things that what you call. I think I have, and honestly, again, the founder CEO role also determines the fact that your cultural traits tend to show up in the organization's cultural traits. So I think those are the 3 things that we over-index on, and the organization tends to go ahead and reward also. It allows us to make sure that by building companies is really hard. So if you can have those 3 things as the cornerstone of your conversation, at least the bullshit from your conversation is gone. Right? You're honest, you're humble, and you'll constantly be curious.
What have you changed your mind about when it comes to managing and motivating people?
Lots. In the earlier days, if you look at it over the last 3 years have been transformative to some extent. And again, thanks to COVID to some extent and the growth of the company, which is happening simultaneously for us. I was less of a communicator. Essentially, I was much more an introvert, and I continue to be an introvert. So don't like really.
It's not apparent, I must tell you that.
Yeah, true. So from an introvert standpoint, it was subtle. That means we expect people to get it, not really communicate through a very explicit process of things, right? It helped in a world where everybody's in the same building, same place. They could see you, watch you. There are kind of
subtle cues.
very, very simple cues through which things were happening, right? Versus the moment we actually got into a more of a COVID world and the growth which is happening, then I realized that I need to change my style completely in terms of being very explicit about communication, talking about values. For example, values were never talked about. It was actually practiced, and that's what it is. And when somebody asks you, you can kind of intuitively say that, but you never had a codified mechanism of bringing it, right? Now that's starting to become important in terms of doing it and doing it much more explicitly. Given the company is also global and international, communications, I have changed a lot in terms of looking at it much more explicitly, which I wouldn't have actually.
You've talked about instinctive decisions, and I want to kind of go deeper into that. How do you know? There are times when you get an idea where you lean into it because you feel that it's just the time. I think you've mentioned earlier that in December 2015, you were stuck in a coach when your flight got delayed and you were just discussing random ideas. And that's when you decided to charge 0 brokerage fees. That's an instinctive idea. It had probably been bubbling up somewhere in your subconscious, but it surfaced back then, right? At other times, when you get an instinctive idea, you will probably say, it's good, let's hold on to it. In this case, the very next day, if I'm not mistaken, you went and announced it, right? How do you distinguish between a great instinctive idea or impulsive idea or one that you want to kind of, is there a way? I mean, how did you know back then that you got to do it? Why did you not take another
I think, with every idea, you kind of thinking about rewards and risks, risk to reward kind of ratio, right? As in saying, what is that you got to lose? And what is the potential that you have got to gain?
Tell me that. When you get an idea, what is the first thought that goes to your mind? Is it what's the most I can lose or what's the most I can get?
I'm a trader. So for me, unless I make peace with the risks, I would never think about rewards. So
you think about the downside first and cap it to some extent, and then you think about the upside.
I mean, if it's not capped, I wouldn't even do it. Like, for example, the 2015 decision of going 0 brokerage was because 3% of our revenue was coming from equity investors. So I had made a peace with it, saying that if I lose, I'm losing 3% of equity brokerage. I mean, 3% of our revenues, but with the potential of virality, right? And also with the potential that if it didn't work, I can go back charging. There is no rule that says I can go to 0 and can't come back up. It's hard to come back up, but you can potentially come back up. So it kind of made sense to attempt it, and that was instinctive because the first thing I did was actually call a chartered accountant and said, dude, how much will we lose by
reconfirm your calculations.
Reconfirm my calculations. So typically what I've been doing whenever I have an idea is I document it. I write it down. I let it.
Where, if I may?
Usually it's in the middle of the night, so it's on Google Keep. But then I take it, I put it on a Google Doc and write it down and share it with a bunch of folks. Let it sleep on it for a while, and And then 90% of them never make through. It kind of drops off there. But kind of pick up on the ones that feel okay in terms of risk to reward. I think, like I said, I think trading, running a business, it's all very similar skill sets. Every time you buy a stock, you're thinking risk to reward, saying. I think business is also about that, as in you, and then in trading there's this whole concept called bet sizing, which is not every trade you take the same bet size. In the sense you have 10 lakh rupees, you can't be putting 10 lakh rupees on every trade. On 90% of your trades, you probably should be putting only 20,000 rupees. And 10% of the trades, you need to put 10 lakh rupees. Because if you don't do that large trades, you'll never make money in your life. Business also like that. I mean, keep nibbling, keep doing small bets all the time. And every time, something feels right, the small bet starts showing results, you just kind of put more meat behind it of sorts, So, and trading, business, even playing poker, to be very honest, it's almost exactly the same thing.
In the context of business, how does this work? Are you creating, in the context of stock trading, you're creating optionality by buying and selling through the day, right? In the context of business, how are you creating these bets? Is it about creating lots of products and features and constantly testing so that you can double down on something really big when it comes up? What is the optionality for you?
Yeah, no, see, the thing is, like I said, these bets in a business isn't really always new products or, it could potentially be just an improvement, or it could be as simple as a support article written a certain way. Like someone has to have an incentive to spot it and then improve it. Because if there is no incentive to spot it and improve it, it'll not happen, right? As in, so I think as a CEO, my job is to figure out how do we incentivize people to spot it. So we actually run something called a spot awards in the office. So anyone can spot anything that can be improved in the business, right from the pay slip to anything. And we give them an award, and it gets calculated for the appraisals as well. So there's people are fighting to spot issues in the business.
So this is great, because is this how you're hoping to prevent the next downtime messages and all, because you're trying to proactively focus people on stuff that may not have surfaced yet?
Yeah, no, the thing about trading platform, right? As in that downtime, we have a lot of dependencies as stockbroker, right? As in, the thing is, we connect to the exchanges through lease lines. The lease lines, assuming one of the lease lines, there's this weird term called flapping, right? A lease line can either be down. If it's down, it'll move to a backup. But if it's flapping, it doesn't know if it has to move to the backup, right? And it's a very weird Indian freaking thing, okay, with lease lines. So when it flaps, so orders that are getting placed during those times when it is flapping, users don't get confirmation for orders placed immediately, right? So it's like an impossible problem to solve today, right? As in, the best you can do is
someone intermediate state. It's not like
it's not down or not up.
Yeah. You've said in the past that sometimes you have to make decisions with 10% of the available information, because if you had 100%, then decision making would be very easy. What kind of first principles or mental models do you look at when you're making decisions using just 10% of information?
All big and important decisions are made with limited data, very, very limited data. The earlier you can make a decision, the higher the alpha is, the higher the gain is for you, the higher the ahead of the curve you would be from anybody else. And so you can choose how comfortable you are at what level, and what, goes back to what I was saying earlier. Are you one of those who can see what others can't see? If I have 100% data, then hopefully everybody's seeing it. That's not a time to make any decision. Is it at 80%? Is it at 50%? Is it at 10%? And, if you can make more successful decisions with 10% signaling data, 10% data, then you'll be more often than not far more successful than otherwise.
You've spoken earlier about the difference between intent-based purchases and impulse-based purchases. What have you understood about Indian consumers in this context?
Every one of us has both sides of it. It's same across the globe, by the way. Intent driven commerce is what we are all used to. And
I want to
inspiration.
buy something, I go
Yeah.
searching for it, or I open a site for it and decide to buy it.
That's correct, right? Black t-shirt, boom, 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 I get it. A bigger pie is actually inspiration-based commerce. Much bigger pie is an inspiration-based commerce. That's how the bazaars work, right? The bazaar, the reason why there has been a bazaar for hundreds of years is because I go in and I see things and I get inspired and I buy them. I do go to the bazaar with an intent also, but the intent to inspiration ratio is 20-80. You actually buy 80% of your products through inspiration and only 20% through intent. Think about your own shopping experience where you would walk into a mall but walk out with like 10 bags. You didn't go in saying, I am going to buy 10 bags worth of like things. So inspiration-based commerce, inspiration-based anything is not very well developed on the internet today, because structured information, data structures allow you to essentially be a lot more intent-driven, and therefore that has taken off first. I think shoppertainment, for example, or entertainment-based shopping or live shopping that we are trying to do in Reposo is a multi-trillion-dollar economy, from a shopping perspective over the next few years. And you cannot be both, by the way. It's hard to be both intent and inspiration in the same thing, because you come there either to say I am built on intent or I'm built on inspiration. You can't be built on both. That doesn't make any sense. You have to have a primary. So yeah, we are going for...
Is this taking us back to the days of late night TV infomercials where something's going on? Like,
that was
fundamentally,
bad.
why is that?
But that was bad. That's not inspiration. That's just
bad
like...
production, or
Yeah.
just bad because...
No, it was both bad production, bad products. It had a very different performance component to it to say, I'm going to get these cheap products. I'm going to basically do something. I'm just going to sell off something. It's a very profitable model, don't get me wrong. I just don't think that's inspiration. But is it are those seeds of inspiration? Yes. That's where it does start. But I think the true seed of inspiration is when you walk into a bazaar and you see stuff. That's your true inspiration. So it's not taking you back anywhere. It's taking you where you are today. It's just not there on the internet.
What makes you get up? I mean, especially maybe we might go back to your time at MedLife or otherwise also. Like, what makes you get up after you take on hard knocks?
One is, it's a great question.
I can sense that you're uncomfortable because every time I've met you, you've always come across as, you're on your feet, you've got the answers and stuff like that.
I don't think so. I don't think I have the answer for everything. I think the first is, a little bit of this is just how you grow up, right? So I'm sort of, I don't like giving up so easily. I think that's...
Where does that come from?
I think maybe my parents. I think they were very sort of, hardworking. Sort of my father came from Dindigul and, studied in a Tamil medium school and sort of came up the hard way, right? And I think that made a big difference, right? I think he sort of never gave up. I mean, he could have given 100. He couldn't speak English till 11th grade, right? And he's sort of was in railways and then worked his way up and so on, right? So I don't believe in giving up so easily. So I think that's one thing that keeps me going. The second is, Rohin, to be honest, I get very excited by possibilities, right? I mean, for me, once I get enthusiastic about it, I sort of, it doesn't matter what the near-term pain that you have to go through is if you feel like there's something very interesting, right, in the end that you can build. For me, even in the MedLife days when we were going through tough times, it just felt like telehealth was here to stay, right? And sort of you were really genuinely improving things. So, you sort of, I think, and a bit of a longer term view to what you're building, I think makes you, sort of helps you ride through the tough spots. The third thing that makes me get up after knocks, quite honestly, is my family. I think, Sandhya, my wife, and the kids, all, by the way, are hugely supportive. And I think that really helps because, when you're, no life is a straight journey, right? I think startup life, everybody thinks only about the good things. You asked about the unicorn, but the reality is, I think the day in and day out is very hard. And I think it's a tough job, and it takes a lot out of you emotionally. It takes a lot out of you physically. And I think, therefore, having a bit of a supportive family helps. I think these may be the three things.
Let's go a little bit more into the emotional part. Because that's one of the things that doesn't get talked about a lot.
Yeah.
Why does it take a toll on you emotionally?
The first, Rohit, is I think you're alone. I mean, you can't share your fears, your anxieties, certainly with the Ken. I'm just joking, but I think you can't share it with your investors. You can't share it with even your top team in many ways, right? Because, a lot of the startup is about creating. I mean, it's about impossible odds. I mean, if you look at any stats, it's impossible odds, right? And therefore, it's very lonely. And that builds up in terms of stress, right? You don't have somebody to talk to. You don't have somebody that you can actually really...
What do you do about that?
I, by the way, talk to Sandhya. I talk to my wife. And I think that it becomes much easier because, I mean, it's one of those people I have full trust and I can actually have the conversation. And I think you need just a non-judgmental listener. You don't really need anybody to solve your problems.
And someone who will also call out bullshit.
And someone who calls out bullshit. So I think that really helps. I think so. That's one reason, I think, for the stress. I think the second, which I think is partly media-driven and partly your own, is the need to sort of appear successful all the time. And I think it's complete bullshit, right? I mean, the reality is there's not a single founder that I met. Incidentally, I met 752 founders in the last 16 months. I keep count. I have notes about them. Not one has gone through only good times, right? But yet, if you go look at social media posts, you look at any of our posts, including mine probably, right? You only see the positives. You don't see the negatives because you don't want to portray it. I think these are the two things that I think add up to stress. And I think I've become better at it now in Mensa because I think going through a couple of cycles really, really helps, right? At some level, it doesn't matter, right? And I think that mindset shift, I think takes a lot of effort to get to.
How does this emotional baggage or stress weigh as you go lower down the organization for the average employee who may also be stressed and wondering about the future and if the economy is slowing, etc. and stuff like that? What do you do as CEO?
So
how do you handle that
The
part?
first is communicate. It seems very basic, but I think lots and lots and lots of communication around the good, the bad, what's going on, I think is helpful because most times when people don't know, they imagine things that are much worse than they actually are. So one of the things I do even today, it's whatever, as I said, been 17 months, right? Every week, I send out a top of mind message to the entire team saying, here is what I'm going through, here are the priorities that I think there are, etc. Right? I think just this constant flow of communication helps because you know the good, you know the bad, so that's one thing that I think helps. The second, I think, Rohin, is actually having a bit of fun at work, right? I mean, unfortunately, not unfortunately, I think we all work hard. It's a fact. But I think making sure you take a little bit of time out, whether it's once a month, whether it's once a quarter, whether it's once a week, depending on who you are, and just going out and hanging out and getting a drink together makes a huge difference, right? So we do that quite religiously, and I think that's helped, right? It's not like Mensa doesn't go through stress. Of course, we all do. But I think these two things, at least for me, have helped a lot. And I think it helps people across all levels of the organization. Transparency and communication and making sure you're fun.
If I were to represent the analogy that you said of the problems that Razorpay has solved and the problems that Razorpay has yet to solve as a glass half full or half empty, how do you normally see the world? Do you see that there are more unsolved problems waiting out there? Or do you
Definitely. See, what we have solved so far is payments in a big way. And in some form, things around payments. But when I look at when I speak to a startup founder today, what are his biggest pain points? Where is he spending most of his time in? Still a startup founder when he's starting the company and for a long period of time, still spends a lot of his time in managing just money. And that is the aspect that I want to reduce, right? Let me give an example, and it might be a little detailed, but when you speak to somebody in India and ask him, when you say that somebody has a business mindset, what you typically mean is that he has a money mindset, right? That this guy can build a business because he knows how to manage money, right? It's different than US and UK, right? When you say that this guy can build a clothing company, you mean that he's really good at clothes. When you say that this guy can build a logistics
marketing, great at
he's really good at logistics or he's really good at marketing. But in India, when you want to build a business, you have to be really good at managing money because that's the reason most of the businesses fail, right? And that part needs to change, right? Like, and the reason that exists is that 50-60% of your time, if you're building a successful business, is going to go into managing money, in receiving money, in making payments, in getting access to credit, in raising funds if you're a startup founder. If I can reduce that time from, let's say, 60% to 40% or 50% as well, that extra time will go into his core business. So if you're an e-commerce company, they'll go into differentiating yourselves on logistics, differentiating yourselves on quality and stuff like that, which is your core differentiator. But today, that time is going into managing money, which is not your core differentiator, which every business is reinventing again. So if I can take that out and make Razorpay the center of excellence for that, then every business is on a same standing from a financial management perspective, and they are spending their time on differentiating on the core proposition. That is where we would want to take this up.
Interesting. So managing money, dealing with money gets commoditized, becomes something which is affordable and predictable.
Yeah. Like, to give an example of payment gateway as well, right? Like, when we spoke to startup founders, they were spending a lot of time in just integrating and launching a payment gateway, like 3-6 months on that. Today, it's as simple as, okay, you need a payment gateway, just sign up with Razorpay and be done with it. It's not a differentiator anymore. Anyone can sign up with Razorpay, pull that in, and what differentiates you now is what you do after that, right? So the same thing we want to expand to the entire financial ecosystem.
From an entrepreneur point of view, if you could go back through your entrepreneurial journey and maybe change one thing, is there something that you would change or do differently?
Many things, like many things I would do differently. But yeah, I mean, that's the whole point of all the failures, right? Because you can only learn through them. You never learn through success. So I've had so many failures. I think the biggest I would change is I would build something I'm passionate about early on. I think my first business, I was bootstrapping and I was only optimizing for cash flow. And unfortunately, as an entrepreneur, if you were forced to optimize for cash flow very early on, although it builds great fiscal discipline, it sometimes takes away from that ability to build something which is really meaningful in the long run.
It just becomes a numbers business.
It just becomes a numbers business, and then you start doing too many things too early, and it just becomes like a, like a small boutique services business, and that's how most of us end up. So I feel that if I had the conviction to believe in myself and stay true to what I was passionate about right at the start, which was hard because I was also 23, so I always feel that was all part of the larger plan, I guess. It's hard for a 23-year-old to have that kind of foresight, but I think because I have this thing I'm a marathoner, right? So I have this thing that I will not give up. I don't know when to check out. And that those 5 years were a bit too long for that learning to come through and get imbibed. I think I pushed it too much because I was like, I will not quit. I feel that like the only reason I've succeeded is because of grit. But then sometimes you never know when to, check out.
Very interesting. But grit is great, but you're also saying find your passion and marry it. So it's grit into passion, which is important. And for the first, especially with that business, like, you had grit but no passion, right?
Yeah.
And you're now saying that what I would do differently, and I would start with passion,
yeah,
and then marry it with grit.
Yes.
So that I would have like a longer runway.
Runway.
Tell us what's been the difference, because this is a very important transition. You worked for international multinationals as senior executive heading countries. You've run your own startup, you've sold it, and then you were heading PayU, and now so you've made this transition between founder to professional CEO more than a couple of times, right? So what's the difference each time when you made that?
So one thing to clarify out here is, while I am the CEO and while I'm not the founder, doesn't mean I'm not the owner. There's a difference between all of these three. I see this as something which I own, and I see this as my personal reputation is attached to the reputation of Pine Labs and vice versa. And if you run with that mindset, then you don't see yourself as an corporate CEO. And then if you have a tag called founder or if you have a tag called owner, it doesn't really matter anymore, right? So one thing which I did clarify very, very early with the board and with the large shareholders is I'm going to run this as my own company. And because of that, I'm going to expect you to treat me in that same way. And I was very, very lucky. By the way, I have many, many friends from different walks of life who say, oh, I've been called in to run so-and-so company. And they think I'm going to give them an advice. And I'm saying, guys, no, wait. Please understand. You should know what you're getting into and where you're getting into. Let me give you an example of Lokveer Kapoor. Lokveer Kapoor had a requirement of his own where he said, I wanted to step out. In 3 years, he hasn't called me up once. The only time when I have called him up is like, hey, Lokveer, I need to know this one. Can you help me? Absolutely,
I assume
Amrish.
it would be to get some papers signed or something.
Yeah, sure, absolutely happy. So I think that has given me a complete sense of ownership and comfort. Now, by the way, that is what I am trying to do with the organization also, which is how can you have a larger set of people who treat this as an ownership? So, just recently I had the sales head come back to me and he told me saying, आपको डांटना है तो आप डांट लो, लेकिन मैं आपको एक बता रहा हूँ कि बॉस, you don't really need to do it, क्योंकि ये तो मेरी कंपनी है, तो मेरे को जो चाहिए मैं करते रहने वाला हूँ. So आप डांटो या नहीं डांटो, I'm going to get this done. So you then start to feel that he's got the owner's mindset.
Where is that coming from? The owner's mindset. Is it ESOPs? Is it something else?
I mean, ESOPs is obviously the base. ESOPs has to be there, right? But then the second piece to it is also the freedom of making decisions and be aware that you're not going to get judged. Now, this goes back to my corporate world and what I do in the startup world, right? One of the things that I learned in the corporate world, which just completely killed me, if you ask me, was the whole corporate world is structured to be judged. Every action
and to be risk averse.
And because you're going to get judged, you also end up becoming risk averse, right? So one of the things that I have done in each one of my startups is you should not have an environment where somebody is going to judge you. HR is not allowed to judge you. The legal folks are not allowed to judge you.
What does this mean? Because I'm very intrigued and this is very important. What does it, I know at a simple level, what you're saying makes sense. You should not be judged. But at an organizational level, what are either the cultural values or the processes that you put into place to make sure that that reflects that you are not judged?
Yeah.
Like, let's say someone decides to do something, take a bet, and it tanks. What does it mean at Pine Labs to say that person will not be judged?
That's a great example. And that's one of the things which I'm actually trying to say, right? That you make a decision and your decision tanks. You're not going to be under the pump for that piece. However, in a large organization of 4,200 people, the problem is somewhere else. People come in with that mindset which says, I don't want to make a decision. If you don't make a decision, I have to tell you, I'm going to go after you. You have to make a decision in your position and you might be successful or you might be unsuccessful. That doesn't matter. But if you don't make a decision, that is unacceptable.
Doing nothing is not an option.
Is not an option, right? And that, for example, is where we've drawn a very clear hard line which says you cannot come into a situation and says, oh, the HR didn't give me the right answer. Or, the HR is going to ask the legal how that is going to all transpire. I wasn't sure how the CFO is going to handle it. These are not areas that you can get away with. You as a leader or you as a person have to make a decision, and it's something which I'm trying to push in a big way. That's important. The second thing which, again, coming from the corporate world is what you don't want is you're not allowed to talk about a third person and the person is not in the room. Now,
Respect for the absent.
Absolutely. I'm just saying this figuratively, right?
We have that as well.
Because
do not say to anyone behind their backs if you can't say it to their face.
Absolutely. So that leads to this whole concept of politics which starts off, right? So some of those things, if you start to implement it, people then make fearless decisions knowing that they are not going to get judged. Of course, the outcomes, everybody is going to look at what the outcome is, but that's not judging, right? It's like, in the corporate world, you have this scenario, where, you might be 3 drinks down, you make a comment and somebody comes the next day to you and says, what you said wasn't completely sensitive. No, hang on. Were you actually at the drink table with me and judging what I was saying? No, you got to stop doing that. I think that's some of the things that we are trying to inculcate in the types of companies that we are building.
If we were to dissect NoBroker's success as a company on the basis of either the philosophies or principles that it stands for, what might those be?
I think there are two principles perhaps. One is that we have always assumed that if we could make the slate clean, how would we start? For example, there was no concept of a phone relationship manager ever in real estate industry. We said, hey, let's assume that there is not a single broker who can take you and put you on the back of his scooter and show you houses. We are starting afresh. Now, how would you connect to people? And what information that person would need? For example, our tenant, I'm digressing a little bit. For example, a tenant is often deluded into believing that this property is very hot when it is not, right? So the broker, once he guesses that you are interested in this property, often says, hey, the token is you have to give the token by tonight. Otherwise, there are 5 more people who are going to...
It's an online hack as well. You go to many of the sites and you see selling out fast. Like you go to booking.com, it'll show you 17 people have looked at this property. So it just preys upon our psychology to essentially say it's hot. So therefore I need it, even if I may not need it.
So that's a trick which brokers use often. So what we did with the help of technology is we said, okay, this information is required. It is not that this information is a waste. This information is required.
Provided it's true.
So can we do it? And the answer is yes, because we can do it extremely easily. You just tell. So we have displayed it now on the site as to how many people have viewed this property and how many people have taken contacts. So for our first principle, which has helped us immensely, is to always think from ground up, assuming nobody has done this before. So how will you do it?
There is some phrase for that. I'm not exactly getting. Is it zero truth? Starting from zero truth, starting by making no assumptions and there are no truths. And then is this something that you do often at NoBroker?
Yeah, often, because the way in which the things that we have done, be it packers and movers, no one in the country has ever aggregated packers and movers before. The way in which we have done at this scale that we have done, which requires completely fresh thinking.
What is that, if I may ask you? Why do you say the way we have done? What is it that you have done which is different?
So what people basically have done is saying that either typically what's happened is that people have said that I will have my own trucks and I will do it. Or the second way that people have done is they have said that, hey, I have got the customer. I'm going to pass the lead to them. And then they will convert. What we are doing is a third way. We are saying that we will not have trucks, but we will bear the entire responsibility of our brand. We will take the payment from the customer. So the customer can catch our collar if anything goes wrong. And despite us not being on the ground doing the physical movement, he can call us anytime because we are his face. And he can ask, hey, where is my truck? Where has it gone? So when you are doing something which has never been done before, it has to be done the way in which you said, is basically think everything fresh. So that is one core principle that we have used. And second principle is basically look at the inputs first and output later. So instead of asking the sales team as to how much sales has happened, look at the inputs more, saying that are the owners increased? Have the owners increased? Have the interactions increased? Are you basically seeing any dip in any core input metric? So then the discussion becomes less about, hey, you have not done a good job, to what has not helped you do a good job.
You've said that you're one of the most successful startups at not being able to convince investors to invest in you, right?
Yeah.
So what are your learnings from all your unsuccessful attempts at fundraising?
Yeah, I don't think I'd taken much learning out of them. I don't think we could have built Ather another way in that era. So we just had to muscle through 5-6 years of really
Is there any
painful.
advice that you have for others who might be?
If you want to go down a path where you're going to be building something that's ultra hard and very investment heavy upfront, be out there more. Tell your story from rooftops. Ather, given our own DNA, is more quiet.
In spite of your
I
top
do
job
internal
being a
storytelling.
storytelling.
But I do internal storytelling. I
Why-
didn't
why
really
is that?
succeed at just selling. I didn't really realize in the early days, and actually I'm still learning that telling stories outside, because it just seemed like a facade. It just seemed like a fake thing to do.
Where does that come from? Because think about it, right? You're telling a story to your employees or to your customers or potential customers. There is really no.
Oh,
I mean, in
actually,
both
the
sense-
problem is never one-on-one storytelling, but a more general shout out in the public space out there. Your story,
It
that
feels fake. It
it
feels
feels
less.
fake. It feels, why are you doing it? But I do, on second thoughts, do now recognize that that was a mistake. I should have just seen that as part of the job. That just go out, tell your story legit to every media guy, like legit to every person who can amplify it. Be out there, tell, like have a blog post published every week, right? Like do that build in public thing
Is that part
legitimately
of
well.
one of the OKRs? Is there publishing on company blog? Is that one of the OKRs?
yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Do you believe you're replaceable at Ather, or
I
that
hope
you
so.
should be?
I hope so. If you've done a good job of org building, my role as CEO should be replaceable 100%. Job of storytelling is different. But I believe that's the fundamental job of the founder. And I think you step down from that role when you feel that the story for this org is done. There are no more stories to tell here. Then it's all execution. Then it's all scale up. Then good professionals should run the company.
Is there a founder mentality at Ather where there is this certain awe of founders and what they think and what they decide, etc.? Many
I
startups.
don't think so. I don't think so. At least lesser than what I've heard outside. Yeah. It's not like we know a secret that others don't know. So people respect us. I hope so. But I don't think they're like just sort of falling flat if they see us and awe of us or in fear of us.
What's a stock response that your employees or colleagues might hear from you if they come to you with a problem that you expect them to solve?
I would typically tell them how others are hearing them that they're not able to see. And I would encourage them to go have that conversation. I would not rush to give them a solution. Okay, I would sometimes rush to give them a solution, but I would generally, my first instinct would be to try and tell them, this is how you're sounding to the person that you're having this struggle with, right? This is the perspective that they have. Understand their situation. Because that's an advantage I have. I know what the other person's going through, their role, their pressure.
So that's your vantage point because you see more of the organization.
So all I try to do there is, listen, I have an advantage, a unique vantage point. If you come to me, I'll just immediately give you that vantage point, right? So you quickly understand, oh, wow, that's what's happening. I've been telling finance, sort of solve this process for a long while. Listen, they can't do it because we're down to the last month of cash. So don't expect them to, at this point, change PO systems, right? And amazingly, being just open with people about stuff like this is super for most of them, vast majority of them. If you just tell them the reality of that person in the company, they're like, oh wow, now I get it. So at least personally, that will be my stock response.
I'm assuming you always use Make My Trip while traveling.
Yes, sometimes go Ibibo too. But no, actually, I have to be honest. For some parts of the world that I've traveled, it wasn't possible. So I'm quite happy. I, by the way, quite often use competition
to figure out what they're doing better.
All the time, if at all, but all the time. And my colleagues hate it because after that, they get very long notes. First, they used to be written notes. Now they get very long voice notes. About good, bad, ugly, everything else. And but I think it's important. I am definitely in Andy Grove's camp saying, only the paranoid survive.
This is very interesting. So, I mean, I get that you come across interesting features or you see something and you write like a note or you send like a voice note. I'm very curious to understand what happens to that after you've sent it. Because often what happens is it's come, bunch of people read it, and yes, there is stuff in there that needs to be done, needs more work, but then there is also this pressure of all the other things that we have to do. So how do you ensure that such occasion, whether it's from you or other people, thoughtful feedback which comes in which doesn't directly correlate to something that you're already building or shipping, how does it get prioritized?
It's a great question. You've clearly struggled with the same thing yourself. I can see that. Like only someone who's a tech founder can understand this, because they say, "Hello, there's a backlog. All this is there and all." So yeah, I think the prioritization is the key, like in everything in life. So to get buy-in is very important, and I think that's pretty much my style of working. I'm never going to say, "Listen, drop everything else and do this," unless we are systems down. That's obvious, right? So if it's a new suggestion, I'd say, "Listen, the upside, whatever potential. This is where we got to get together and see how critical this is." But
Who do you send it to?
So I'll typically send it to
a respective product manager, or
a group of people. Chief product officer typically, and then it's up to him to decide who it goes to. Chief technology, copy him, copy Rajesh for sure, and maybe one or two of the business folks. So it'll be 4 or 5 people on it. I'd say, "Listen, let's come back, and let's anyway have a detailed discussion on this in a week's time." So let's have a discussion. Some will get discarded, and very often I'm very happy to hear. Actually, very often they say, "Oh, this is in the works." What this helps do is accelerate that. Also, very often, people are a little defensive. They say, yeah, we thought of this, buried this. Well, I think it's good. And then he'll get a little bit more this thing. So I think you've got to, thrusting things down good people's throat is a bad idea, always. And exactly for the reason you said, Rohan, they're working on a ton of stuff. They're busy already. Right? It's not like they're sitting twiddling their thumbs and saying, "Oh, everything's like buzzing and humming," right? There's nothing to do. I'm just sitting back and watching. No, they're doing a lot of stuff. And there's attrition, and there's talent wars, and there's everything else going on. And now, oh God, another note from Deep. So I think that's what happens first.
Yeah.
So I give them a warning. Okay, guys, long voice note to follow. And then they say, okay, let's
I tend to do that as well. This is not urgent. It's very rare, right, Ruchi? Like that. I mean, I think you guys at some level lucked out, because in general, startups will find it very hard to become unit economic positive at scale in the very first year, or to itself, right? So don't you think, when you say that, so I mean, I'm going back to what you said. Let's say a startup is trying to build a business in a space where there are no equivalents. Hence, the VC investment thesis does not exist.
Yeah.
And it's also not a sector where you can instantly go and there is a spread between buy and sell, which you can capture through this, right?
Yeah.
So by definition, wouldn't they be losing some money? And
you just need one investor. Right? You just need, and it's important because you have to get the right investor who believes in what you're doing. Right? So because it's not just about the money. After a point, color the money is the same, right? What I intend to say is that if you're clear of what you're building, it could be either from an economics perspective. Like, for example, there was this entire wave for a very long time that focused on growth. Economics will follow, right? But you have to go to what your core is.
That wave has crashed now.
So, but what is your core as an entrepreneur, right? You cannot change. See, feedback is very important. Absolutely important. You should incorporate that feedback. Like, for example, feedback came our way. We incorporated in terms of how we are doing the business. We did. But what are the core on which we build the business? Our core was the fact that we have to aim for profitability. We have to raise debt. A lot of people came back to us when we started raising a lot of equity also, right? Ki boss, ab to you don't need. Boss, no. Leverage is the way to build the business, right? There will be businesses like our financial services business where equity will follow debt. So there are some core principles that you have to establish in the business. And for us, like, for example, tech was a huge enabler. But it was not that everything, we are a tech-enabled organization, right? And we are a sales-enabled organization. We're not a marketing. You would not have seen our name for the first 4 years ever, like of business. Right? No, we are sales. So you should be very clear what your DNA is. And I think after a point, we started to reflect what are our key principles, and we used to start our pitch there. This is our key principles. This is what we are building. Then go to it. After a point, obviously, it became the numbers which started speaking. But there have been a lot of discussion around saying that, why are you so focusing so much on profitability at this stage of your life when growth is more important, right? So we have had our own challenges. You would see that there is a time year on year, you would see a growth in commerce a little lesser, because we said at that point to ourselves that building the financial services business was more important at that point, right? So you have to make those choices and you have to stick to those choices. And then when you're having a conversation with the investor, you should be absolutely transparent. I think that's one thing that we've always been. It's never been about future mein aisa ho jayega. We always start about what we have built, what we intend to build, right? So it's not been a story that we're chasing a unicorn, right, which is a mythical animal, right? It's saying that we have built a horse. It will gallop fast and faster.
What are some of the first principles that you typically turn to when you're faced with problems that you haven't encountered before?
I think so. This whole value of authenticity, which means just seeing the problem for what it is and not getting muddled up with other peripheral things. We kind of tend to do that anyways from the beginning. So I don't think I ever had a situation where I don't know what to do. I mean, there are times you get into a dilemma for other reasons, but it's largely been about how to do it. Right? You know that this needs to be done, but it sounds like it's just not doable. And so how do you find a way to make it work? And very often you find you're able to find solutions which I can give you some examples.
Sure.
So in our land transactions, right? So sometimes landowners want something far more than what works for you. And there was this one instance where a landowner wanted, in exchange for his land, he wanted a certain amount of money. Plus, he also wanted 60,000 square feet of built-up area in an office space to be given to him right in the front. And we negotiated, and we found that at the end of it all, the max we can do is 30,000. And plus that amount of money, and it was not working. But we needed that land. It was inside windmills of your mind. It was right in the middle, and we wanted him to give us that so that we can complete the whole project, and moved him to the front. And he said no. After discussing with his family and everything, he came back and he said we can't come down below 45,000. That's it. So then went back and then realized that if we were to lease out that building for a year, the rental income would offset the cost of that 12,000 square feet. So I went back and told him that, can I give you the building 1 year later and take the rent, earn that rent for myself for 1 year? He said, no problem. So it got solved that way. So very often these kind of solutions, especially in our business where you're always dealing with large amounts of money, you will find ways to make these deals work. And sometimes it's just about turning things this way or that way. And it's all about perception. So in this case, it was time value of money, which he didn't value. He valued the product, the asset, even if it comes 1 year later. For me, it's just about how to make it all work. So, but coming back to, I think your question was more around principles. I think
authenticity came up a couple of times in our conversation.
Yeah.
Why is that so important?
The reason I keep talking about it again and again is that I find it very difficult to deal with the fact that most companies don't give it any importance at all, right? And everyone is just trying to figure out what others are doing and then find ways to. Fashion designers looking at what is Gucci doing next and how do I become better than them? Why are they not just thinking from first principles of what is so that's why it's also very frustrating when why is everybody not? It's simple, and it's not. It's very easy, right? You can see a problem, you can see the solution in the problem. Why is everybody not working that way? So that's why it keeps coming up again and again.
The sense that I get is that over the last 26, 27 years, there have been many times when you had the opportunity to grow faster by doing certain things in a different way. But you choose to say no to those, which is why where you are. So my question really is, saying yes is often easier than saying no.
True.
You've said no to a lot of things along the way as a company, as an entrepreneur and founder. What are the things, typically when you say no, What guides you?
In fact, just to tell you, I've realized over the years that I've not said enough no. And now I'm learning to say no much more, What guides me is simply, that this is not going to, it just doesn't make sense, right? So if there's...
So why would you, in an earlier, like you said, you should have said no many times earlier. In those times, why did you say yes?
So those are things like, for example, signing up small projects. And I said that purely out of the temptation of getting the opportunity to design something on Kasturba Road or on, Lal, in a very nice location. It's in the heart of the city. So just that whole opportunity to create something nice. But when you look back and you realize the amount of bandwidth it took away from your larger projects, it would have been better to have said no. And now I do get these opportunities coming to me again. And I'm like, no. Very tempting. Would love to do it, but no. So it's simply about the focus and the desire to create that impact more effectively, and also I think the amount of stress and stress in the sense in terms of amount of work. You realize that you've taken on so much, you're consciously trying to cut down things that don't make sense and just focus on what makes sense so you can do it more peacefully.
As a founder, how do you allocate and prioritize your time on a weekly basis? What does your calendar look like? How planned is it? How unplanned is it?
I have a fantastic team, so I have the luxury of not being too operational. Other than these 2 reviews that I told you, the sales review and the customer's feedback review, I don't have to do too many other reviews, a little bit of tech maybe, but not too many on a weekly basis. I have the luxury of thinking about fundraising, strategy, and most importantly, people. So I spend a lot of time, I do a lot of skip levels, 10 minutes one-on-one, but I do skip levels across the country, across cities, across functions, across age of their that they've spent with Homelane. Doesn't matter whether you spend 6 months or whether you spend 6 years. Spend with them, because that's the biggest threat of dilution of culture for me. We've grown from being 1,000 to 2,200 people in the last 18 months. That means more than half, because there's also churn in that 1,000. So about 2/3 of my organization is less than 18 months old. How am I going to translate the way that I want the culture to be in an organization where there is 2/3 of new people? That's the biggest challenge that I have. And technology can help you a little bit there, but can't help you as much as you need. And especially in times of COVID, when you can't really travel so much and stuff like that. Now, of course, all that is out of the window, but that to me is what I spend maximum time on. But otherwise, I'm blessed that I have a team which handles the day-to-day stuff much better than I can.
What's your span of control? How many people do you have who report
7.
to you? Are there phrases inside Homelane that you're known for? Pet phrases that you typically utter during
Everybody
reviews?
says that frugality is my only is the only thing that I care about, because I'm known to be tight-fisted, if you know what I mean. I don't think, but I do believe that it's my primary duty to spend money that I've raised far more carefully than I would spend my own money. If you want to ask my kids, I'm sure they will not tell you that I'm tight-fisted. I mean, the fact that my younger son is in NYU proves that I'm not tight-fisted. Otherwise, I would have sent him to probably London or somewhere else, maybe slightly cheaper, but I'm not. But I do believe that my fiduciary responsibility goes up 10x if I'm spending money that I've raised on behalf of my company. And I take that responsibility very, very seriously. So that is something that I am known for. I also like to get people to add a bit of humor and not take life too seriously. Otherwise, I try and forcefully inject some humor in everything that I either tell them or do a little bit just to lighten the mood. Otherwise, it can become quite, it can bog you down. So, I guess I'm known for these 2 things mainly.
What's your definition of success when you were in your 20s? What was your definition of success when you were in your 20s?
So, if you reflect back and I can, and when I thought about it then, the definition of success at that point of time was to be, rich and famous and so on, right? It was like everybody else. As I became older, the definition of success has changed quite a bit, right?
What is it today?
So today it's really about figuring out impact. Now, whether it's an impact, and it still can have a monetary aspect to it. It could be impact in terms of a return to a shareholder, but it is also impact to, the community or the system. I'll give you a very tangible example. I don't want to be preachy. So I had all the options in the world to be in San Francisco, to be in the US, and I was doing gaming companies. Zynga was the largest IPO in the Valley, right, after Google. But I wanted to come back to India. One, I missed my fish curry and rice, but more importantly, I also wanted to be with something that my parents and my family could see that impact. Like my dad and mom and all have relocated back here. They can see and relate to what I'm doing there, right? If I'm in support.com or in the early days when I was
success is tangible as opposed to abstract.
That's correct.
So what you're saying is that people here saying that, oh, my son Shan, he's in the US, he works for this tech company, he's really successful, but beyond that you don't really like. And
you might be, and even beyond that, like if you're developing something on crypto with Bitcoin and all that kind of stuff peppered in, it's hard to explain that to my dad. It's hard to explain that to a normal
I would
person.
argue it's hard to explain to anyone, but let's leave it there.
Yeah. And then actually I had this entrepreneur pitch me that crypto is like TCP/IP and all that stuff. But I'll leave that stuff. But and then secondly, when I actually physically met Matthew the first time, I was sold. Not because of the business in general, because I didn't know how the business would pan out. It was really that life that he was doing, directly interacting with the fish. It's hard life. It is really, really, really hard life. It was enjoyable. Like you speak to these people there. So the problems that I've had to deal with in my corporate life is, am I going to get 7% raise this year or 15% raise this year? Can I solve attrition problem here? What is the bell curve and all that stuff? Here, people are actually working out, well, can I get 2 square meals during the 2 months when there is a trawling season? It is an incredibly hard set of problems you're solving. And once you get into that problem, and that problem can also be a business, which earlier I could not do, it is quite invigorating, right? And it is very, very different from what I've done before, and I love it for that.
How do you empower employees at CRED to be independent, risk driven, and innovative?
So we have 2 values, leadership values. One is audacity, and second is solve elegantly. And at CRED, appraisals are done on values and not on performance. So,
walk me through, like, is this an annual appraisal? And then how does this happen?
This is an annual appraisal that is done in like every company. But instead of saying, this XYZ employee achieved these numbers or shipped these products or solved these problems, we say, so we have values like earn trust, solve elegantly, skin in the game.
How many values do you have?
Around 12 to 14. We are constantly changing and adjusting because some of them are repeat, but they are with more nuance.
They are unique.
But they're unique.
Yeah.
So what we do is we are going through a version change right now as well. Now, we rate the team members on values. Why is that important? Because what if you are an extraordinary performer in terms of achieving numbers, but you score low on earn trust? That do you earn trust of your team members, your peers, your consumers that you serve? If it's low, they don't make it. We actually, that's how you do interviews also. So in interviews at CRED, it's done only on values. So let's say 5 people are interviewing. We all are given 2 or 3 values to check on. Not, what did you achieve? That's filtering done by the hiring manager itself or the talent team that, the resume is a match of the competence we are looking for. The interview is only on values.
This is again, I agree with this, and I see where you're going with this. In some ways, this point is related to the earlier point that I made about credit scores, which is in most places, culture and values exists as an abstract concept on a board, and it's typically talked about maybe in an all hands and stuff like that, right? And because it's not used in more and more places within the organization, it doesn't have value.
Yes.
It's just an
Yes.
So in the same context of, let's say, a credit score, right? Unless you're using it everywhere, it does not have value.
Yes.
By embedding your cultural values into your hiring and into your appraisals, you're ensuring that no one can ignore them.
Yes.
Because
Also in daily vocabulary.
hmm,
If it doesn't appear in your daily vocabulary, they will still remain abstract and once a year event. So when things like truth seeking, earn trust, skin in the game is not used on a daily basis, they remain abstract concepts. So you cannot, the frequency of value cannot be only on moments of crisis or moments of large decisions.
So just to continue with this point before we move on, now you've got 12 values. It's impossible that any person, I mean even you, I'm assuming,
Yeah.
will not excel on all 12,
Yeah.
right? So what happens in an appraisal? I mean, someone
Perfect.
excels on 3, someone excels on 4, someone excels on 2, etc.
Yeah.
Like how does this happen?
Well, you do not get promoted if your ratio of Excel is not growing. We'll not become perfect at any of this. And you have to also create coaching mechanisms that, okay, you have not been rated well on earn trust.
Whose responsibility? Are the managers? Is there like a
the
coaching
managers,
function?
right? But there has to be enough coaching system within the system. So we do ENPS, like CRED has been consistently voted on the top, but that's not enough. Like we have a defect mindset, so we actually look for where did we score low. So just right now, on my own MNPS, there were 3. This is not on values. There are 3 traits that I am not scoring well on. So right now I am building a document with the help of my directs on what should I start, stop, and continue to improve my scores on these 3 things. So unless we take a defect fixing mindset even for individuals, we'll not do that. And most people are not honest about it. They are not comfortable taking feedback, which stops their progress. We tend to not.
How do you solve for that at CRED?
Well, hiring itself is a big bar. We know how are people going to take feedback. For example, truth seeking is one of the value that we test for. The first thing is, are you taking truth seeking about yourself? Do you know yourself well? Have you empowered your team members to give you feedback? So we ask a question sometimes that what was the most uncomfortable feedback you received in the last 3 months? If you have not received it, which means you have not empowered, because obviously there are flaws in you. Obviously you are not great at many things. So people should be able to walk up to you and say that, yeah, Rohan, you are terrible at this. And if they don't feel the freedom, so like we took the Red Alio thing and we took radical candor as one of our values as well, because we wanted to encourage that care personally has to be there. Otherwise it just becomes an obnoxious culture. Because if you don't care personally, then why would somebody change? So therefore, that part of our culture we have really retained well, to really care personally about people, right? They are not and therefore I always think that relationships at CRED are not going to be about the time they worked. We think about our relationship going forward as well. I'll give you a small instance of what we did, which was shocking for a lot of team members, but to me it was an obvious thing to do. So companies do buyback. And you can choose to give it to current employees and past employees as well. You can choose to say, and many companies have made a decision to only give buyback to the current employees. And I was like, no, as a shareholder duty, it should not be different for different people. Shareholding is different. Current compensation is different. So when we do buyback, it will always be for every single shareholder. They all have the same privilege. And to the team, it's just shocking that, but we should. I said, no. Tomorrow we will be ex-employees. And would we want this feeling to ourselves?
How long did it take you as an entrepreneur to get over the hit to your ego when someone tells you, I don't think Fractal is interesting enough for me right now. At some point,
Mhm.
you must have taken it personally. At some point, you must have let it go and say, it's not a problem. We'll come back and talk some years down the line.
I think I still haven't reached that point yet. I think it's still personal, because it is your baby. Entrepreneurship is your baby, and everything good or bad I take personally, absolutely personally, and that sensitivity could be a bug, but I think of it as a feature. It is a feature because that helps me have have this drive to build a better Fractal. When I look at people who are saying, "Hey, you're not good enough," I say, "Okay, I get you. I hear you. Okay, give us some more time and we'll be good enough for you." I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying we are not arrogant about it, but we know that we're building a great company, and one day or the other, we will get there where you will feel that it's a good enough company for you as a potential client or as a potential Fractalite.
In the same vein, what keeps you paranoid? Is there a very recurring theme that comes to you in your dreams at night or when you're thinking, which is related to entrepreneurial paranoia about disruption, about the future?
I think the biggest reason for paranoia is irrelevance. That is what keeps me awake at night, which is, are you still relevant? Are you still doing things that are relevant to your clients and to Fractalites and so on? Or complacence has kicked in, where you feel like, I'm good enough, I'm doing well enough. That is the day I think rot starts to set in. And I want to make sure that culturally, we know that whatever we have done, whatever laurels we have, we don't rest on those laurels, but we take every day at a time and start the day with a clean slate and say, this is day zero mindset. Everything is to be won today. Because a client has liked your work yesterday doesn't mean that they will like it today. Just because an idea has worked so far doesn't mean that it will work tomorrow. We have to make sure that we earn the business, we earn the trust of clients and employees and everyone every single day.
How often do you change your mind about things that you strongly believe in?
Quite often. In fact, I remember sending a WhatsApp to our group, about 50 people, just day before yesterday, saying my last Sunday's thoughts, and I think one of the things is I'm questioning everything more than I ever questioned before. I'm taking nothing for granted. I'm really taking nothing for granted. I'm taking nothing at face value. And that should not unnerve you. I'm just telling myself that. And the second one is I'm going to change my mind more often than I've ever changed it before. And that's the future.
What triggered this, if I may ask?
I think it was just Sunday, me thinking on a few things of how do I want to look at that. And I think the last 6 weeks, I've been dealing with this element of fragility in the world, where I think we're fooling ourselves. And I don't mean change just for the sake of change. And it's not to make people alarming, because most people don't like change. But I don't want to have a conversation where somebody says, yeah, but we've been talking about this for 3 weeks now. You changed your mind. Yeah, I have changed my mind about a thought process, because in these 3 weeks, there's so much more that's happened in data and what we're looking at that it should be okay. It's kosher to change your mind. And
It's
lot of
very
people,
important, because sometimes employees expect you as, the chairman of the board and the founder to not change your mind, because changing your mind is seen as, how could you change your mind? We expected you to stay the course. So what do you tell them?
No, I think you need to communicate on that context of why you change your mind. The why and the communicating is very, very important. And we have to treat everyone on a basis where the IQ and EQ of everyone is on par. And I think my Swadesh days have taught me that, I think they've taught me a lot of that. When you're talking to the community and you just feel, when you're having those conversations, you feel you're going to have a slightly different conversation with 5 women in a special help group or an SCG group or in a village development committee. But they've got the same kind of ambitions, albeit obviously muted because they haven't seen a world that you may have seen. But what they want for their kids, what they want for a family point of view, what they want to do with something is pretty much the same.
From that, what's your advice to young folks on choosing a career and becoming good at it over time?
See, my advice is that my usually advice is that I don't know. I need to think on this, because I mean, usually now my advice would be that one of the reasons that I'm an entrepreneur is because I was a content creator first. See, when it's either creating a product or content, you realize that you get this infinite scale that you will not get if you're getting paid by the hour. So my advice usually becomes that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, creation will be huge. Now, whether you are creating a game on Roblox, there are kids in US creating games on Roblox. Whether you are creating a YouTube channel, whether you are live streaming on Twitch, you are a chess player, but you live stream on Twitch and you make hundreds of thousands of dollars. So my advice usually is that these leverage points that you have, use them and understand that this whole education system, and I know I'm trying to get them to these colleges, but I think entering into these colleges makes them a good employee. It prepares them to be a good employee. It does not make them a creator. So I was obsessed with computer science, but I knew I hated physics, chemistry, maths. So I didn't get into IIT. But in a way, I'm also lucky because I think if I would have gotten into an IIT, I think I would have been more satisfied with my life because I went to Xavier's Jaipur where all the toppers come from and all my friends went into IIT Bombay. I had this itch that, I'm a failure. So I used to do things more differently and I used to hard work even more because I used to be in this constant race that, they have already taken a step ahead.
Interesting. So if I were to kind of place you in some kind of a bucket, it's like the intersection of two circles, one of which is doing something which you enjoyed, and the other one is a sense that you did not get what you want and you failed. So you're doing something which you enjoy. At the same time, you also have this chip on your shoulder that I want to kind of prove to the others, and that both of them fuel each other.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it used to be, that was an initial motivator. Now I rarely give a fuck about, the extrinsic part. Now I think intrinsically, I see founders, how they change after getting their secondary. Like they'll make $1 million and they'll be like, they'll take weekends off and they'll travel and they'll chill. And I'm not talking about the best founders. I'm talking about some founders who do that. And I don't get it. For me, the more I achieve, or even when I made some money, I just wanted to work even harder next day because this was the byproduct. What still motivates me is that I remember that everybody has something that they want to show to the world. I remember that I was a very socially awkward kid. I was weird in a way. I used to talk, but I used to be weird in that sense that my classmates would not like me. They would think that he is different. But then I remember when I was 12 years old, I made this KBC program in QBasic. QBasic was the language. And we showed it. The teacher liked it so much that they called everyone in the class and they showed that program to them. And I think in a way, I'm still that kid who wants his products to be who wants his products to be appreciated.
Let's switch gears here beyond lead. I think you've given us a great understanding of how lead works in the spaces that it works, etc. I want to talk about you as a person. What makes you get up after taking a knock? And I'm sure you've taken a lot of knocks considering the space that you're targeting and the ambitious visions that you're setting for yourself.
Yeah. See, for me, I think the one thing that got me into this space was a combination of experience of pain and then the energy of seeing a possibility. What I mean by that is the fact that there is lack of equity in education is a pain that
it's what drives
there.
you.
Yeah. And kids are just full of possibilities. So when I look at that child and when I'm looking at those children, I just feel like there is not a single moment I can give up. Because if I give up, then we are giving up on our future generations. So For me, it's the kids, it's the classrooms. That is all that never allows me to give up. And whatever challenges, failures we come across, ultimately, everything that we are doing at Lead and I am personally doing is in the service of those children. So, we are parents. I'm a parent. You're a parent. We never give up. However sick, however unwell we are, we will do everything in our capacity to take care of our children. I see all children as my children. And to be honest, I think that is what keeps me going.
I know this is an unfair question because I'm asking you to imagine something, but do you think you and Sumit would have ever started, or you especially, would have started Lead if you were not a parent?
It's a tough one for me to answer because I can't imagine what it would have been like. But it is very much true for me, particularly. I think Sumit would. I've known him now for so many years.
It
Yes,
looks like
he would have
anyways
anyways gone in that direction. For me, Zoya was the turning point. My own child was the turning point.
So you said earlier, I mean, the way you look at other children changes once you're a parent, because then you don't just see a child, you see a set of possibilities and opportunities, and you're wondering, do they have the same ones?
I think that's why I love children. I especially love working with very young children. I love, whenever I'm visiting a school, my energy zone is the pre-primary section. They are just bright-eyed. They are always energetic. There is hope
And they're
because
sponges.
they've not been.
They're just absorbing.
They're sponges, and they are just also givers of love. And I keep telling my daughter actually that I do what I do today all because of you. Both because you coming in my life changed the way I started looking at the world, and secondly, a lot of work that I did with Zoya and the way she responded to it gave me a lot of positive energy that, hey, kids are actually waiting for this. And this is possible. As I said, when I saw how she was reading, she was an avid reader by the time she was older. And my younger one, actually, she did a lot of the teaching of reading in a lot of ways, right? Through games and stuff. And when I saw that, and I was like, see, I've empowered this child for the rest of her life, because wherever she goes, she's reading on her own, she's curious. And if that can be done for all children, why not? So I think for me, that is the energy. I'll give you an example of this, Rohin. When COVID had hit, I remember that, there was this morning when we got to know that Bangalore schools had shut down. It was 11th of March or something. And, Sumit and me were driving to work and we were still trying to figure out what's happening. And when the schools shut down in Bangalore, and our business was largely in the south at that time, we were partnering with some 700 schools at that point of time. Our first reaction was, what happens to the kids? Because they're no longer in school, their end of year assessments are there and they have to prep for the new academic year, and schools won't know what to do. So what can we do about it? It was not business, it was not anything else. And in 5 days, literally, we launched Lead School at Home, which was an online class that our tutors were doing because our school teachers, we didn't have any time to communicate with our schools. And we basically started that. And in fact, that, of course, over 2 years became a whole online Lead School platform till COVID was there, which we, of course, shut down because we don't need it. But I think this example is just an anecdote to share. All of the decisions that we make come from the place of what is in the best interest of the child, how do we reach out to more children. Our sense of urgency to grow also comes from every year that we don't reach kids, it's like a generation lost. So how can we get there fast? And that just gives me immense energy. So that's my driver.